Missouri applied for statehood in 1818, 201 years ago. Can y'all turn your minds back 201 years? You're not going to have any cars. You're not going to have any electricity. You're not going to have any telephones. You're not going to have anything that you all know about. This 201 year ago was a long time ago. And so Missouri was a territory and they wanted to become part of a union. So they applied for statehood and they caused quite a turmoil in Washington, D.C. because at that point in time they had the same number of slave states as anti-slave states. Missouri had wanted to come in as a slave state. The reason they wanted to come in as a slave state was because the majority of the people that were in Missouri Territory, they believed in slavery. A lot of them had slaves. So anyway, they decided that they wanted to be a slave state. The Union and Washington, D.C. didn't want to grant them statehood because, like I said, that'd throw them out of balance. But then Maine, do y'all know where Maine is?
No.
Up on the east corner of the United States, they applied for statehood, and they didn't want to be a slave state. So we had two states come in, one wanted to be slave, one wasn't, so it worked out, so they kept their balance. Whenever they applied for statehood, this little girl named Russella Easton, she and her family had come from the East Coast to St. Louis, and then they had a lot of money. Their dad was a lawyer, and also he was a postmaster for the federal government. So they had wealth, and with wealth you had nice things. Also, Russella, she would not have had to do any chores because they had money. They would have had servants come in or hired help and pay them because, like the mom, she had 11 kids. At supper time, she wouldn't have gone into the kitchen and turned on the stove, opened up the cupboard, got some mac and cheese and put it in the pan and had it. No, you didn't do things like that. They would have a great big open place with fire in it. Have you all seen those big fireplaces in old houses? If you go to any museums or like the Daniel Boone down at Defiance, the houses, they had these great big open fireplaces, and that's where they did their cooking. You would get your vegetables and stuff out of the garden. Somebody would have gone and hunted the meat, so then you had to clean it. So it was a big process to feed people, and if you had 11 kids, that was an even bigger process. But she would not have had to do any of that. She would have had some maybe light chores, but not heavy chores. She would also have been taught to read and write, and there was a lot of books in their house, which was a rarity. Kids that age, boys more so than girls, were educated. Girls weren't educated because they just didn't think that the girls needed an education. But anyway, Russella, her dad was the first attorney general for the state of Missouri. And that's a lawyer, and so he was the lawyer for the state. And at that time, the state capital was at St. Charles. Have you all been to the Capitol of Jefferson City?
No.
Well, that's
Later this year.
okay. That was not the first Capitol building in the state. It was at St. Charles. When it was at St. Charles, they had started construction on the one in Jeff City because they thought that the Capitol should be in a more central area of the state. But her dad would have had a lot of guests that would come into their house, and she would hear about all of the people that were worried about Missouri becoming a state. She didn't have any worries because, there again, she had money, so her life wasn't going to change a whole lot. But then there were slaves in the state, and the slaves, they did not know what was going to become of them. They wanted their freedom really bad. The Indians that lived in the state, they didn't know what was going to become of them. They had lived here for thousands of years, but they were uncertain what was going to happen to them if Missouri became a state. Then I'm going to tell you about the little boy that lives in St. Genevieve, and he lived on the river, and he was French speaking. So anyway, all of these kids, their lives were going to be changed with Missouri going to become a state. Indian girl, and her name was Sacred Sun, and she was an Osage Indian. Missouri had a lot of different Indian tribes, but the Osage was the strongest tribe. And they were a nice, big people. They were looked up to. And anyway, they lived along the river. And the Osage tribe, they did not move from place to place. They had more of a central location, and they would have a garden, which most tribes didn't have gardens. And the men would go out and hunt and bring home the animals. A lot of the Indians tribes, they would just live in an area until they couldn't find anything more to eat, and then they would all pick up and move on to someplace else. But the Osage didn't. And there was a fort on the Missouri River that was called Fort Osage. And Sacred Sun lived close to that fort. And she would go to the fort, and she would look in the windows of the stores and stuff. She wasn't allowed to go into the stores. If she would be where there was a group of people, she couldn't get in that group of people. She had to go to the back. She couldn't mingle with them because she was an Indian. Now, that was just the way people thought at that time. Not the right thought, but that's what they thought. Anyway, at Fort Osage, there was a lady named Mary, and she was a sister to the first little girl we talked about. Mary was older, and she was married, and her husband, they ran Fort Osage, or sometimes they called it Fort Sibley, for same place, just two names. Anyway, Mary, she had a school, and she taught the Indians how to read and how to write, and some of them how to play the piano. Sacred Sun, she learned how to read, she learned how to write, she learned how to play the piano. So she was well educated for a little Indian. And she and her tribe, they just did not know what was going to happen to them when Missouri became a state. Like I said, they had lived here for thousands of years, but that didn't matter. The white settlers, they wanted their land, and they were going to take their land. And so the way they were going to take the land was probably move the Indians. And that's what did happen. Did you all, I don't know which, are you part of the ones that have studied the Trail of Tears?
No.
No? Okay. Well, you're a little bit. And that was where Indians were moved from their homes out to Oklahoma. And the Osage Indians from Missouri, that's where they picked them up and they moved them out to Oklahoma. So we don't have any more Indians in the state. Now, Oklahoma still has Indians. A lot of states do have Indians, but Missouri is not noted for their Indian reservations because we don't have any. Anyway, I was going to tell you about these arrowheads, and Kylie Dameron's dad and grandparents, these are their arrowheads, and they have a farm east of town, and it's along, one of their pieces of land is along a creek, and whenever they farm that in the springtime, they'll take and go through there with a plow or something, and they'll unearth these arrowheads and other implements that the Indians used. The one that is most interesting to me, see that little ball here in this corner? Yeah. How did they make that? You know, that would take some doing to make these. There's a little ball and a bigger ball. They're pretty cool. Now, these rounded head arrows up here, those are 6,000 to 10,000 years old. That's how long Indians lived here. They lived here in this area. They had lived here in this area a long time. That didn't make any difference because the white man wanted their land, and so they were going to have to move somewhere else. This was an enslaved family, and they lived on a plantation down in Louisiana, Missouri. And 200 years ago, the Johnson family was in Missouri. Anyway, Grandpa Johnson is what they call him in our little story that we read because they don't have a first name for him. And he was about 9 years old when Missouri was applied for statehood. And he wanted it to become not a slave state. Anti-slave state is what he prayed for, so that he would have his freedom and his family would have their freedom. But it didn't happen at that point in time because Missouri entered the Union as a slave state. So Grandpa Johnson and his family, they didn't get their wish. They didn't get to be free. They had to work on this plantation, and it was called the Jeans. The last name was Jeans Plantation. And they used their slaves because they grew cotton. And cotton is a labor-intensive crop. It took a lot of people to take care of it.
Combos?
Okay, but anyway, they grew cotton, and you know what you use cotton for is for clothing.
Clothing.
Yeah, they
Cotton balls. Cotton balls.
Yes, cotton balls, and also they grew tobacco, which is another crop that takes a lot of people to make that crop.
Did they ever plant the tobacco?
Let's raise our hand when anyone wants to say something. You.
Did they live in like where it has the Bluefield, Missouri?
Well, no. This is Louisiana. Have you all been to Louisiana, Missouri?
Yes.
Okay. This farm was around Louisiana, Missouri. So this is what I'm talking about.
Well, usually they're farming for cotton too.
But you are right. They do a lot of cotton in the Blue Hill now, and nowadays you do.
Because remember, it used to be filled with water, Ella, at this time, until they drained that all off.
Okay, so tobacco, they grew it, and tobacco is great big leaves, and then they would have to cut the leaves, and then they would hang them in a barn, and so that the air would go through them and dry them out, and then they would take the dried leaves, and this surprised me a while ago. Do you all know what a cigar is?
Yes.
Oh, okay. They made a lot of cigars out of this tobacco, plus they had it for their pipes.
What about chewing tobacco?
Yeah,
they did that too.
Okay, well, and they did the cigars because there was a skill in making cigars, and there was a lot of noted people that had a reputation because they were a good cigar maker, and they would make these cigars for the master, the owner of the plantation, and then he would sell them for money and to make money. Talk about is Joseph Bogy III, and he lived in St. Genevieve. And St. Genevieve is a river town. Y'all been to St. Genevieve? It's down south of St. Louis, but it's on the Mississippi River. And at St. Genevieve, that is the oldest European settlement in the state of Missouri, and the French founded it. Joseph Bogy's family was French, and they had lived here for 3 generations. Joseph Bogy's grandfather came, and he was called a French voyager, and that was, he traded and trapped in furs. They had a trading post, and Grandpa Bogy, he would go out in the wilderness, and he would trap and bring these furs back, and they set up a trading post because other people that hunted, they would bring their furs in, and they would trade for whatever they needed because they didn't have money. You know, now you use carts. They didn't have carts either, but they didn't have money to use to buy things. I'm going to pass around to you some furs. And I was going to ask you all too, you know, Chase and Megan McCurdy, their dad.
They go to our school.
Yes. You can take it home and just pass it. And people would bring these in, they would trade, then they would take the furs, and they would make things out of the fur. They would make hats. Beaver hats were very, very popular at that time and before. And also the coonskin caps. Davy Crockett, did you all know who Davy Crockett is?
Yeah.
Yeah, and he always had a coonskin cap on. Well, anyway, they would make hats and other articles out of all of these furs.
Whoa, is that
They did. But they're so soft. Yeah, there's a hat up there. But isn't it soft? But now, did you like this? It's coming your way. Anyway, the Bogy family, they listened a lot to what was going on because they were French speaking, and they did not know when the Missouri became a state if they would be able to, if they would speak French, or that they would be made to learn to speak English. They wrote in French, and then another thing that was very important to them, they were Catholics, and they were afraid that whenever Missouri became a state, that they would take away the Catholic religion. So now, do we speak French? No. Do we write in French?
No.
Okay, so, but you can't go to the Catholic Church. That was the two things that they were worried about. Three things, and they did get to keep their religion. The Bogy family was very interested in politics. They took part in the government. Every generation, they would hold offices. And Christopher Bond, governor of Missouri several years ago, do y'all recognize that name?
No.
Well, he was governor of Missouri, and this man here was his grandfather. So, politics still runs in their family. So does okay, this is kind of supposed to be like what a trading post would offer. You would you would bring in your furs, and then they would allow you so much trade. And the women, they would like bowls, washing boards, that type of thing. The men, they would like to have the guns, the ammo, and all that type of stuff. Now this is a real buffalo coat.
Woo,
Do you all know what buffaloes are? And would you like to guess how much that coat weighs?
5,000 pounds. 6 billion.
No.
50 pounds.
You're getting closer. Come on, then.
60.
Okay, it weighs 18 pounds.
What?
18 pounds is how much that coat weighs. Okay, does anybody have a little baby brother and sister? You pick them up when they get to be 18 pounds. That's a pretty heavy load to carry around.
My sister's 20 pounds.
Well, she's
How would you walk in
how would you like to wear this coat through the snow, packing your gear, and you got a coat that weighs 18 pounds?
So it would be uncomfortable and you stay very warm.
You would stay very warm, and you wouldn't get wet because of the hide. So it would be a good coat.
Wait,
Man, I just packed that thing around.
in that coat?
And then also this here coat is made out of a horse hide.
What? What's a horse? It's a horse. So they killed the horse?
Well, I would imagine that the horse died.
died.
And because you wouldn't kill a horse.
Sheep.
That's a piece of.
That one's gonna This one's gonna be piece of sheep. Yeah, that's
Sheep. Yeah, and they used a lot of sheep hide too, but that was later because those were domesticated. They brought sheep in, but in the early days, 200 years ago, they would use wolf, bear, beaver, raccoon, ermine, just all kinds of animals.